Hi, everyone. It's so good to see everyone logged in for this event. I see a lot of familiar names logged in, so thank you so much. My name is Amy Mather. I'm the Adult Services Manager here for Omaha Public Library. I'm very excited about tonight's event with Timothy Schaffert, amazing author and friend. So a little housekeeping for tonight, and want to tell you a few ways that you can participate in tonight's event. So you will notice that there's a chat box on the right-hand side, and feel free to say hello to Timothy. Jean has already said hello. And there you can just talk amongst yourselves. You can do a little shout out to Timothy, all the great things. You can also, you will see on the bottom of your screen, an ask a question feature. So please feel free to post questions for Timothy. We will get to those at the end of our event. And if you post any questions in the chat, we will move that over to the ask a question area just so we won't miss it. Also, this event will be recorded, so you can come back at any time and view it. And if you would like to purchase a book, follow the link below where it says Purchase Perfume Thief. And we are partnering with the Bookworm to sell Timothy's book. And if the reader wishes to have their book personalized by Timothy, they can order via the link provided. And they just need to put personalized to your name in the order comments line, which is the last box on the website's checkout page. All books will be signed copies that you purchase from the Bookworm. And the personalization from Timothy, of course, is free. Thank you, Timothy. And also, along with that, we also are doing a little prize drawing for folks attending tonight's event. And we are giving away 5 of Timothy's books, autographed. You'll see one that right behind me. And all you need to do is fill out the survey that is posted in the chat. So go fill out that survey. We just have a few questions, just a few. And now I'd love to introduce my really good friend, Timothy. So Timothy Schaffert is the author of 6 novels, most recently The Perfume Thief, which was published by Doubleday Penguin Random House. And the Los Angeles Times called the book's title, Character, one of the best protagonists of the summer. His previous novels have been named a New York Times Editor's Choice, an Oprah.com Book of the Week, and a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection, among many other honors. He is a director at the Creative Writing Program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the curator of the 50 Years of LGBTQ Studies at UNL Festival and Exhibit. Yay! And so I'm going to hand it over to Timothy. Timothy, thank you so much for being with us tonight to talk about your new book. I'm very excited, and I can't wait for you all to read it. It is amazing. I absolutely love your book. I've been gushing over it for days and days and days and days and days. And I'm very excited for you all to read it. So I'm going to make myself small. Let's hope I do this right. If not, oops.
You made yourself big.
And we practiced this too. See, this is what happens. Crowdcasting. Here we go. All right, Timothy, take it away.
Oh, what am I doing? Am I reading?
First of all, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the story of The Perfume Thief. Just give people a little bit of tease of like what this book is about.
Okay, sure. So it's set primarily in Paris in 1941. The Nazis have occupied the city, and Clementine, the narrator, is a woman in her 70s who has had a career as a thief, and she is specialized in perfume and rare scents. And she thinks she has settled down into a retirement, into a quiet life in Paris with a little perfume shop. But when she gets pulled into this kind of espionage plot that's part of the French Resistance, she sort of comes out of retirement and brushes off her skills, and is much of the drama hinges around a particular book, a journal of perfume recipes that may hold more secrets than anyone realizes. But so that's that.
That's awesome. So if you would just also read a little bit from your novel.
Sure. So this is actually from a little ways in. It's page 74, chapter 14. And so at this point, Clementine has gotten drawn into the world that she needs to investigate, basically. And so she's hobnobbing with the Nazis with the intentions of deception, ultimately, and gaining access. And so in this chapter, we'll meet Des Chabillé, also, who is Clementine's dear friend, who's a cabaret singer. And I believe we also then meet, we'll meet the Nazi, Oscar Voss, a kind of Francophile Nazi that she anticipates has the book that she's looking for. And there'll also be mention of Lutz, who is another Nazi who is basically keeping captive another cabaret singer named Zoe Saint-Angel. And Zoe is also a hinge in the drama. At the Ritz Hotel in the early evening, I'm led to a private salon where maids have set up a semicircle of chairs. The men move about with leisure, drinking champagne, but no one's going anywhere near the long banquet table littered with all the critters of the forest: woodcock and pheasant, partridge and thrush, goose and snipe and wild boar, nearly every carcass dressed in ribbons of bacon or dripping with truffle sauce. There are baby octopi tentacles, suckers and all, in a glass bowl. The Nazis even have access to everything out of season: the strawberries of Plougastel, blue figs, red grapes on green stems. White asparagus, always the first glimpse of spring in France, sits here somehow on a plate in the dead of winter. Try not to look so hungry, Day whispers in my ear, sidling up close. The food's only here to be ignored. Disgusting, I say. I look around. I wonder if I can fit a few of these lobster claws up my sleeves to take home to Blue. Day's wearing a flapper's jet black bob, shiny like the wig's been waxed with brilliantine, and she's wrapped up in a fur jacket. Whose hide is that, I ask. Kangaroo, Day says. It was a gift. You should give it back, I say. To the kangaroo, she says. Day plucks a strawberry from a basket, then holds it to my lips. I bite it from the stem. I say, I didn't expect to see you here. I lower my voice to a whisper. You're everywhere the enemy is anymore. It's enough to make a person suspicious. Shh, Day says. A shush she then muffles with a sip of her champagne. I turn to see Lutz approaching. Lutz takes Day's champagne away from her and hands her a different glass. Don't drink that, he says. This is better. Paul Roget, 1928. He has a glass for me, too. Another man approaches, and Lutz introduces us both. Oscar Voss. I've been here less than 15 minutes, and I've met the man I most need to meet. And you're Des Chabillé, Voss says. He leans toward her, lowers his voice. I subscribe to a very secret newsletter sent around by a colleague of mine about American jazz in Paris. You've been in it. Does he mean to flatter her or threaten her? I don't like the sound of it. Just leave her to that little stage in the Bordello Cabaret, please. Don't take so much interest. Though I'm not much of a wine drinker these days, I know, with only a sip, tasting only with the tip of my tongue, they've been duped. The champagne's more than a little off, a half bubble off plum, in a way it wouldn't be if it was the 28. It's so off, I wonder how someone so proud to pour it wouldn't know the difference. I've heard that the Nazis have been robbing the vineyards, so the vineyards have been robbing them back, passing off the labels from recent weak crops as vintage, slapping on dummy labels, rolling the bottles in dirt to give them some dust, even tossing spiders into the crates to spin some deceptive webs. The wine tastes like a wet dog. She had that song, Voss says to Lutz. It was so popular, nobody could ever get away from it. My wife and I, we had the record, we had the sheet music, we even had the music roll for our pianola. He raises his glass to Day. Whatever happened to you? Day smiles, and she raises her glass too. Your guess is as good as mine, she says. Voss then looks at me, and I'm about to say something when he begins to sing. He snaps his fingers, suddenly remembering a few lyrics of Where Were You When? He turns to Day. Where were you when I first sang this song? It's my love call to you. Will you soon be along? Lutz slaps Voss on the back. You're in fine voice, he tells him, in a gesture that's much overdone. Lutz is just sugaring Voss with sweet talk. I'm about to take another shot at introducing myself when a gong strikes, calling us to the chairs for the fashion show. I fear I've lost my chance to weasel in close, but Voss turns to me as we walk through the salon. And you're le nez, he says, the nose of Paris. He takes my arm. You'll sit with me. A seamstress with a pincushion on her wrist hands out folding fans to help us suffer through the heat of the room. The chairs are situated in a crescent moon surrounding a doorway with a blue velvet curtain pinned with foil stars. Voss is younger than me, I'd say, but not by all that much, mid-60s. His only wrinkles are the corners of his eyes. He puts on a kind face, and he's attentive, the sort of thing people fall for. Won't you tell me about your perfumes, he says. Lutz tells me you fashion your fragrances specific to the lady. Or the gentleman, I say. And that's the way of things in America, as I understand it, he says. Every local druggist has his own brew, mixes together his own mishmash of toilet vinegars. I don't think he means to condescend, despite the pause and the country twang he gives druggist and mishmash and toilet vinegars. I think he means to be charming, and he does indeed put on a good American accent. Maybe years ago, I say. Just earlier today, I stood in a corner of the booksellers to skim Voss's body of work, 3 guides to Paris, bound in violet-colored cloth, the titles in gold foil on the covers. His was a sensory tour, outlining the city's flavors and aromas, the cafes, the patisseries, the fashion houses where the couturiers swamp their vents with perfume before every show in their narrow, musty salons. What are the best perfumes? He asks me. New, I say, old. I'm tempted to rattle off any modern perfume that might sound treasonous, indiscreet, scandal, shocking, my sin, the French touch, nostalgia. Instead, I tell him my favorites of all time, some that have come and gone, Houbegan's Violette San Remo, Penhaligon's Amam Bouquet. I've always been fond of Guerlain's Eau de Cologne Impériale, if for no other reason than the constellation of 18-karat gold bees that swarm up the glass bottle, upping the price with every inch. The perfume is quick, evasive, flitting away the second you catch its scent. It was designed to latch on to the royal headaches of Empress Eugenie and spirit them away. Not number 5, he says. I can only smell the touch of cruelty in it, I say. Chanel uses civet from some brood of mongooses kept in tiny cages in Abyssinia. They don't even have room to pace around. Farmers grab the mongoose by the tail and scrape up the oil from its ass. Again, I regret saying anything at all. I'm probably insulting him. Mightn't someone like Voss consider cruelty a virtue? The curtains part and the fashion show begins. All wartime fabric restrictions have been ignored for this show. Not only ignored, but flouted. The gowns saddled with more bustles and trains and overpuffed sleeves than I've seen since the turn of the century. Some of the fashions are inspired by the occupation, by the war. One gown suggests the ripples and billowing of a downed parachute. Another, a canvas tent with its triangular shoulders. One model wears a khaki skirt and jacket set with a number of pockets and pockets within pockets for the management of official papers and passports. The men chuckle at the side of his scarf patterned with ration tickets. Another model wears a blouse printed with newspaper headlines for the Nazi invasion of Paris. The blouse gets a round of applause. I applaud too at the wretched rags, so I'm not conspicuous. I notice Zoe Saint-Angèle among us, sitting across the way next to Lutz. Voss notices me, noticing her. He snaps open his fan with a sharp flick of his wrist, like an opera gossip, and leans over toward me. Poor little Lutz loves too hard, he says. He lets that showgirl run roughshod over his heart. I straighten in my seat so I can peer over the fan's paper lace trim. Zoe's wearing her hair so it falls forward over half her face, and a veil, too. Lutz, in the chair next to her, is pouting. They seem in the thick of a tiff. I think I see a gray shadow beneath her eye, and is that a cut on her lip? I survey and analyze, and I see what I wouldn't otherwise pay any mind to. The snag in her stocking, the loose thread at the seam of her blouse, the scuff at the toe of her shoe. I say, he should let her go then. I worry that Voss can hear the tremor in my voice, my irritation. Voss shrugs. He snaps shut the fan with another sharp, quick click. He can't live without her, he says. He shrugs again. That's why all of that's forbidden, you know. What is? He returns the fan to his lips and he opens it just an inch, raises an eyebrow. Canoodling with the ladies of the captured nations. He returns the fan to his lap. Isn't he handsome, though? For a while he was an actor in the movies, horror movies in Germany. He got a corpse pregnant with a demon. But he wasn't always the hero, usually the victim. He was devoured by a pack of werewolves once. He's got his blood sucked by a vampire. Rumor has it that his director was in love with him, so it thrilled him to kill Lutz in terrible ways. Voss laughs a laugh he keeps in his throat, like a mild cough, amused by this director's infatuation. But I wonder where this director might be now. The homosexual camp in Alsace? And why is Voss confiding in me? Would he be gossiping with anyone he sat beside? The show has ended and all the models return to allow their gowns to be inspected, but Voss and I stay seated. But the sweetest perfume of all, I say, Mur Blanc. I pick up where we left off, dropping the name of one of the most famous of the scents from Zoe's family estate. The scent has been around longer than Pascal has. It was created by his father. And Mur Blanc truly is one of my favorites. White mulberries. It speaks of southern France. It's one of those scents worn by many, but it can still catch you off guard. It's everybody's and nobody's all at once. At the heart of it is a lush honeysuckle, echoing the vine that creeps into every corner of your garden.
Wow, thank you so much. That is amazing.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit, tell us where the nugget of the story started for you. Like perfume as the object of your book, and then and how'd that come about?
So I was working on another novel that was set in the 1920s, and it was about the rich and famous. And so I'm at one point describing this party, and I'm describing all the peculiar and famous people that show up at it. And so in walks someone that's just described as the perfume thief. So she just kind of rolled into the room as I was writing this scene. And so I had a few lines of explanation for her, but then she just kind of stuck around, and I kept thinking about her and thinking about, well, what would that entail, and how would you become famous as a perfume thief, and what would you steal, and how would that be lucrative, and what sense would any of that make? So the more and more I thought about it, the more I realized that was a novel that I wanted to write, and the more I wanted to write it, the more I wanted to write it instead of what I was writing. And so I put that book aside and started working on The Perfume Thief, and which I think was good for that book as well, because I'm in the process now of completely, I've just dismantled it entirely, and I preserved one character from it, I think, and one particular incident, but otherwise it's a completely different book. So I feel like in writing The Perfume Thief, I found my way also to what mattered in that book as well. So, but it's, so then I moved forward with that question of like, what would she steal, and what would that mean to her, and how would she make a career as a thief out of that? And so that sent me into the various archives to just try to explore what those rare scents might be and what people might pay for them.
Well, I am so glad that she showed up, because I love it. So in your research process, did you come across anything so interesting and so weird you thought, oh, I've got to include this in the story?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that, actually. And one thing that showed up in that it ended up being kind of prominent in the book is the butterfly scent and the science behind that, and the investigations of the 19th and early 20th century into identifying the scents that the butterfly and naming the scents. And it's not, and it wasn't just, there was some imagination and some effort made to identifying the various scents of the various species, or what breeds, what do you call them? The various kinds of butterflies. Right. My language for a minute, but so that was something that defined part of one particular element of the book, and just kept growing a little bit too. But I think one thing that I never really did get to the bottom of, but I did include in the book, is the subcutaneous perfume craze of Paris that was reported in American newspapers and magazines, but just only vaguely. And it was referenced as the women of Paris are sticking needles in their arms to inject perfume beneath the skin. But I don't know that was anything more than a rumor. I suspect it wasn't anything more than a rumor, but other people have written about it, and I don't know that anybody's ever discovered any real basis for that.
And assuming the idea is to smell better because you're injecting it?
Well, yeah, that you would be sort of sweating perfume, I suppose.
I will say, if I eat an onion and it's a really strong one, I'm about 3 days in of smelling like an onion. So it's not so far off.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you want to just be randomly injecting
fluid
no. So it's probably an ill-advised.
Maybe I'll eat a rose.
But it's and at one point it was, I mean, like when I discovered it, I was kind of like, not only do I have to use this, but this has to be what the book's about. I was so fascinated with it, and it just ended up being in one scene, and then that scene eventually got eliminated entirely, but I couldn't lose the subcutaneous perfume. So exactly. Snuck it back in. My editor kind of thought I should take it out, but then I ended up I found a place where I could just put a line about it, and so I eliminated the scene, but then just
right. Got it back in. I'm glad that you did, because that's a really interesting nugget for us to know about.
Yeah, and you can look it up. I mean, and there was, I should have looked this up before I got on here because I can't remember, but there was even, I think there's even some artwork that seems to be depicting in an advertisement. But I suppose if I could read French better than I do, I could dive into the French archives and see.
Right. Wow. So in this story, we not only learn about all the details of perfume history, the legends, the making of it, but we also learn a lot about art, fashion, and music as sort of these cultural battles that are happening within the story. And that always there seems to be cultural problems with all of that stuff. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you weave all of that into the narrative, and I love it so much.
Sure. You mean about the role of culture and invasion? And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's really complex because the Germans wanted to conquer Paris, but they also wanted to destroy it. And so but they also wanted everything that Paris was, and they wanted it for Germany, and but they also wanted all of Germany to go into Paris. I mean, it was this they were quite unreconciled about Paris, and so it moved from an initial intention to bomb the city, and there was also fear that when the Nazis were leaving, when they were pushed out of Paris, that they would bomb it as they were going out, and so as in anticipation of the Nazis' arrival, everybody was fleeing Paris, and then some of them came back in, and the Nazis came down and they just shut everything down. And so they refused the people of Paris, heat and food and all the things that they would need to live. They would just, it was just, they, there was a great deprivation, basically, and it was the coldest winter. That the book takes place in one of the coldest winters in years. And so, but at the same time, they were wanting to introduce German to the Paris culture, but they also recognized the great value of the Paris culture. And so for my book, the role of perfume plays many different issues. I mean, it becomes useful to the Nazis and to the Parisians in various ways, as a luxury item, as something that carries with it great nostalgia and elegance and sophistication and history, just, centuries of history. And so that all becomes pivotal to the Nazi mission and their sense of conquest, and it becomes essential to the Parisians' sense of defeat.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Clementine. So she's a queer American expat thief, and she's confident, and she's also very caring of her people, of her friends. And she's also in her 70s, which I also love. So where did you draw inspiration to come up with Clementine?
It's funny because once you start writing and once you kind of have an idea for someone there and you give them a voice, then they start putting themselves together and they start telling you who they are. And to a certain degree, it's also kind of like an actor getting into character. You get under the skin of the character and you get to know them. You just use your instinct and your imagination, and you try to approximate what that experience might be. And so because she was a thief and a lifelong thief, that would suggest a variety of things about her personality and her sensibility. And so you think about, okay, well, how would a 70-year-old thief regard herself and regard her life? And would it be fraught with guilt? Would it be fraught with, or would she be celebratory? Or would it feel regular? I mean, like the questions that would arise as you're trying to figure out who she is, then kind of get answered by her voice. And so I think, so inevitably, a 72-year-old woman who's had a successful career as a thief would be quite confident, I would think, and she would know how to manipulate and deceive and maneuver, and she would know the difference between compassion and lack of compassion, and she would know how to orchestrate and manipulate that. And so I wanted to have her. I wanted her to be a lifelong deceiver in a sense, but I didn't want her to seem like she was deceiving the reader. And so a question that has come up in the past is like, is she an unreliable narrator? And I don't think she's unreliable at all. I think she's probably an unreliable person among the people that she's with, but she's telling the story, and it's not even like there is a reader. I mean, it's the book is she's a first person narrator in present tense, and so really it's meant to be it's not so much a story told as a story emoted, I guess.
Right.
Or, we're kind of in her consciousness.
So if the Perfume Thief, hopefully it will one day be a movie, because I can absolutely feel it that it's going to be a movie, who would you want to have play Clementine? I have somebody in my mind.
God, I mean, like, of course, Helen Mirren.
That's what I was going to say.
But Meryl, I would not reject Meryl Streep. I would welcome her.
Oh yeah, that would be a good one too.
I mean, Meryl Streep is American, whereas Helen Mirren is British.
Right.
But
Helen Mirren would be.
Oh, she'd turn it out.
Yeah, she absolutely would.
But if we're gonna make a movie, they could cast, I don't know, Dakota Fanning, and I'd be.
You're like, yay!
That's right.
Well, I actually really do hope that happens, because as I read through the book, I could see it in front of me, all the visuals of everything, especially the very cold winter. Yeah, all of that. So, is there a scent that you love?
Well, I mean, I always look forward to every spring when I can get that costume jewelry of the garden, the peony.
Yeah.
Love its scent, and it's so evocative of the. I mean, you take it in and you just feel like you're in a garden in 1920 or something. You know, it's like it carries with it a kind of antiquity and nostalgia, and I don't know. I think it's a very operatic kind of flower, but also very approachable. It's an approachable flower, and also the association with graves. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember associating peonies with being planted next to headstones, and I suppose also because they bloom around in Memorial Day or so.
Right.
I suppose that's why we associate with them. But and to my knowledge, the scent it doesn't have an essence. Like the scent of it can't be bottled as a perfume, but perfumers will reference it as a note in a perfume. But I don't feel like I've ever really smelled it in a bottle perfume. But if anybody knows of one that they feel like a perfume that does capture that scent of peony, please let me know.
I will just say that somebody said Tilda could also play.
Oh, Tilda Swinton. Oh, yes. Tilda Swinton. Absolutely.
Rebecca, you are right.
Sublime. Yeah.
And I would love to hear if the audience would. I would love to hear what your favorite scent is too. So plug that into the chat. I'd be very curious. And how about a scent that you hate?
I don't. I mean, there's those stenches that you don't want to smell. Of course. I mean, like I grew up on the farm. You would smell skunk, and I always actually thought I kind of liked it. I mean, that it was
doesn't bother me.
Yeah. I mean, it's a musky scent that's also at the heart of so many perfumes, and the animalic scents. But at one point I had a dog on the farm who got sprayed by a skunk, and that fresh scent of the skunk is absolutely toxic. I mean, you just can't bear that. Poor dog he was just miserable because the dog's senses are much, are
sure.
sensitive.
So I guess we shouldn't bottle a perfume together called skunk.
Yeah, no, not if you're gonna some mild skunk, perhaps, but full on fresh skunk spray is nothing that anybody wants. I mean, I guess I used to think that patchouli. I used to not like patchouli, but I think I've grown to like it. So I think maybe as we get older, we become a little less aggressive about the things the sensory things that offend us. I mean, I think we become more open to flavors and scents.
Yeah. I know that a few days ago, we had a conversation about perfume of our teenage years.
Oh, yes.
So there was definitely some scents that or perfume that I had bought as a young woman that I would never buy again because it is so aggressive in the scent. But and I will just say Poison was the one I probably will never buy again because it's a little too much for me. But but we also talked about Love's Baby Soft as like one of our teenage scents. But do you have a scent from your, like something you wore as a young man, a teenager that you're like, I will never wear that again?
Well, I had a bottle, I think it was called Stetson. Do you remember this?
Of course.
And that I loved. I would probably wear it again if it existed anywhere. I don't know if it's still bottled or not, but I'd be curious. I'm just not, that's just now occurring to me. I haven't smelled it in so long, but I'll have to investigate. I probably still have a bottle somewhere back at my parents' house.
Oh, but we're gonna have to find that.
Yeah. Well, Danny said that in the chat about gasoline and how that appeals to her, and I agree with that too. And another scent that probably young people don't know about, and I don't know if there'll ever be occasion for us to smell it ourselves, but remember when you would get freshly mimeographed paper in class, like they'd handouts that just came off of the roller, and it would have that kind of intoxicating scent that we would all sort of inhale the second it got to our desk. That I haven't smelled in a long time.
Oh my gosh, I had forgotten about that. It's funny is when something like that comes around and it is so deja vu, nostalgic, all those things mixed together and brings a flood of memories back. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I was talking to in another conversation I was having about because Amy, you know that I had these little brain episodes during the pandemic that were just these kinds of, I have some sort of macrovascular disorder that it gives me these little mini strokes sometimes. And for some reason they were accompanied by, or seemed to be accompanied by, these days of almost like deja vu and a kind of heightened awareness and sensory sensitivity, and everything was beautiful. The sunsets were gorgeous. The music was gorgeous. I was just like moved by everything that I saw and heard and smelled and tasted. And so, during that time, it was like because I was losing memories, but at the same time I was having memories without any kind of visual accompaniment. So there was a new way of remembering things, and I would it was like I would remember a scent. I could almost smell it that would place me back in time, but I couldn't quite figure out where or when or where I was moving to. So it was like this weird little time travel business that I was going through, and it was peculiar to be revising The Perfume Thief at the same time, because I talk a little bit about Marcel Proust, and Proust himself, he was ill, and he was conflicted about whether he wanted to engage with society or whether he wanted to withdraw entirely from society, and so that and of course, as an author, he's the one we refer to when we're talking about sense memory and nostalgia. He's the master of nostalgia.
Right. Well, we have some questions from the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you some of those.
Okay.
The first one is, did you try tracking down any of the perfumes and smell them yourself?
No. I think that actually, I did. So not so much when I was writing the book, because I wasn't referencing too many specific scents. And any scent that was specific was so inaccessible that there wouldn't have been any way to smell them. And so I found this amazing book called Odographia, and it chronicles tastes and flavors, and scents. And it is from the 19th century. Very rare book, but it had these amazing details and various other books from the 19th century that would describe like these the cinnamon birds of Ceylon, or these various really just crazy out there associations and historical products and such, and spices that you just wouldn't be able to access today. So that was ultimately what I was seeking for the book. But in the weeks since the book's been published, I've been asked to do some writing about the book. And so in that instance, I have been looking at the history of perfume, of 20th century perfume, and especially early 20th century, and trying to get a sense of what some of those scents were like. And the thing is, you can get a bottle, if you can actually locate like a bottle of Narcisse Noir from 1920 or something, it's not necessarily going to smell like it smelled then because it's so old, and plus our perception changes as well in terms of how we interpret scent, which is why so many of those classic scents that stick around actually change in formula throughout the years, because they're actually, the perfumer has to meet the sensibilities of the modern consumer. And so, but I do here, I'll show you this bottle of, this is Shocking by Elsa Schiaparelli, and it came in this little cage with this little lace design on it, and then the bottle had these bakelite flowers on the lid, and then this is a tape measure. So this is supposed to suggest a dressmaker's dummy, but it was actually modeled after Mae West's figure. Elsa Schiaparelli, the fashion designer, was working on a film with Mae West, and so she came up with this perfume bottle, which is also somewhat reminiscent of the perfume bottle in my novel as well. But the perfume itself has historically been described, the perfume's called Shocking and has been described as having some kind of shocking elements. But if you smell it now, it smells powdery and it's not shocking, I guess. I don't know.
It's not poison.
No, it's very floral, very powdery.
How funny. I love that. It is gorgeous.
Yeah. You can find those bottles. I mean, they made it over several decades. They don't make it anymore, but and you can find various iterations of it from over the years on eBay and such.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Please tell us about a couple of your favorite books that you've already written and a couple of your favorite books by other authors.
Well, my favorite book is The Perfume Thief. Always the newest book's always my most favorite. But actually, I can tell you a funny story. When I was, so people will ask that, like, what is my favorite book? And often then they'll say, or is it like your children? You can't choose. You don't have a favorite book in the same way you don't have a favorite child, which I always say, well, but don't people have favorite kids? I mean, everybody has a favorite kid, or somebody grows up feeling like they're the favorite, or they feel like they're the least favorite. I mean, isn't that like the very foundation of our emotional state as adults, is whether or not we thought we were the favorite or whether we thought we were not the favorite? I mean, doesn't that inform everything going forward? But there, when I was at the New Yorker Festival, one year they had a panel discussion, and the writer, the very famous, very enormously talented writer Jhumpa Lahiri, was on the panel, and somebody walked up. So they had a Q&A, and somebody walked up to the microphone and said, "Oh, Jhumpa Lahiri, I'm your biggest fan. I've read all your books multiple times. I just can't believe I'm here in the same room with you. Please tell me, of all your books, what is your favorite? Or is it like your kids? You can't choose a favorite." And Jhumpa Lahiri says, "I don't have any favorites of my book. Once they're out, once they're done, they're dead to me." So I guess it'd be like having dead children. And she delivered this so, like, I don't know if she was being really dry, but it seemed to be completely an unironic response. And the poor woman, her biggest fan, was just kind of like, "Oh, okay."
Wow.
So I guess like a parent, you have special feelings for the first one and special feelings for the last one, and then the poor middle children have to kind of fend for themselves.
My middle child right here. I understand.
And how about a couple of favorites from other authors?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I am going to plug all my students' work. Like, so we have this great graduate program, and I've just had this great experience of working with these students as they're developing these amazing books. And so Alana Masad just had a book published that just came out in paperback, and it was out in hardcover last year, called All My Mother's Lovers. And then I have another student, S.J. Sindhu, who has a book coming out this fall called Blue Skinned Gods. And just last fall, Emily Danforth, who wrote The Miseducation of Cameron Post, that was her dissertation. She has a new book out called Plain Bad Heroines. Demisty Bellinger. I keep forgetting the new title. The title was Jackrabbit when it was her dissertation, but it's changed now and it's coming out this spring. But her name is Demisty Bellinger. I think it's something like it has the word liberty in the title, but I'm drawing a blank. so those are the ones I would. Oh, and Scott Gill, there's a book called Plastic that's coming out from Pantheon. I don't think there's a pub date for that yet, but that's, if you like Westworld, if you like Kazuo Ishiguro, if it's surreal and fascinating, and it's sci-fi and literary and surreal, and yeah. So those are some books I recommend.
Thank you. From start to finish, how long did it take for you to complete this novel?
Well, I think for the first draft the first version that actually, when I felt like I was finished, because sometimes you feel like you're finished when you're not, but I finished it, and I think maybe it was 2 years, maybe 2.5, and then my Rebecca says Demisty's new one is Peculiar Heritage, but that's her poetry book. She has a novel coming, but yes, Peculiar Heritage is terrific, and everybody needs that. And then she has a novel coming out in the spring as well. So she's very prolific. And then I forgot what I was talking about. What was I? Oh.
But how long did it take to?
Oh, from how long did it take me? Well, clearly it takes a long time, but I can't remember what I'm working on.
We have the COVID year in there too, which really messes up all the time for all of us.
And the weird thing is that the book was actually acquired 2.5 years ago. So usually it just takes like a year, but we were trying to avoid the election year, and then so I was doing a lot of revision, and so I did a fair amount of revision, which took another chunk of time. So
yeah.
So Danny says, what was the title of the Westworld? So that the title that is Plastic by Scott Gill. I should write these in there. Yeah.
We will capture it. Don't you worry.
All right.
So I didn't know this about you. So question is it true that you only write while standing and not seated at a desk? And if so, why?
So why?
That comes from Wendy Townley.
Oh yeah, I do stand, and why? That's a very good question, because I feel like it takes me longer because I'm standing, because I'm constantly. Well, here's why. Because I do tend to. I mentioned that, like, I try to get into the character and that, like an actor, and I also pace a lot. It's not like I'm acting it out, but I am kind of acting it out, and so I'm blocking. I'm blocking on the stage, and so probably if I actually sat down and just wrote, I'd probably get a lot more done a lot faster. But part of the fun for me is just walking away from the computer. I feel like I actually get more done walking away from it than actually at it. So, but I'm rolling the sentences around in my head, and
right.
So I'm not. For me, part of the writing process and putting the words together and finding the language and finding my efforts towards the poetical and the musical is about hearing the words in my ear, like I'm listening to music. And so I'm trying to. So it's not just about telling the story or trying to communicate what's happening for me. It's also about, about playing with those sounds and with alliteration, with rhythm, and
Right.
So for me, it's the book isn't just about the story being told and what's being described in the visuals. It's also about how the words sound.
I love it. And Evelyn just made a comment. She said, didn't Ernest Hemingway stand as well?
That sounds familiar. I think there are other writers. I put my laptop on the kitchen counter, but I'm sitting at my desk, which I'm usually standing at, but it's an old bicycle that some really talented artist has put a desktop on. And so that's what I
so you really are in motion. And
that's right. I do sit, and when I'm sitting, like right now, I compulsively pedal. I tap at the pedal with my foot, but
I love it. Somebody said, love the interplay between how both writing and perfume making attempt to bottle or bind the ephemeral, fleeting throes and pleasures of memory. Was there anything surprising or instructive that you discovered about the role of memory as it informed the novel's narrative, form, or structure? And that's from Justin Perkins.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Justin. Hi, Justin. Justin's a former student. Memory. I mean, that was constantly at play in putting the book together. And ultimately, Clementine is part of her grift, basically, or her scam of the Nazis, involves her ingratiating herself and growing and pretending to be personally engaged with Oscar Voss ultimately. And so she cares for him. He becomes sick, and she cares for him, and he's very interested in her and in her life. And so she finds herself divulging to him details of her life that she's never really told anybody, and that she hasn't even really fully processed herself. And so in the telling of it, which she abhors, yet at the same time feels a compulsion to do so, she finds herself living, drawing back from 1890s Manhattan when she was in her 30s or in her 20s maybe. And so, and an old love affair. And so those details come to life as she finds herself. And I think that's so often how memory works, or it's certainly how memory works for me now. But since I've had those little strokes, my husband tells me that, because sometimes what'll happen is somebody will mention something like, oh, remember that evening at, like, I was with my friends Marco and Joy the other day, and they said, they were talking about the Other Room, that little speakeasy styled bar in Lincoln. And it's a restaurant. And they mentioned it. When they mentioned it, it was like, it caused this spark of like, oh, of course, the Other Room. I know the Other Room, but nothing came along with it. So I'm like, well, no, I don't know the Other Room. Do I know the Other Room? And so they're kind of trying to describe it. And I knew as I was talking about it that I'd been there many times. I knew that I knew the place. I even sometimes had the words for it in my head of like how to describe it, but I just couldn't see it or couldn't sense it at all. And so, but I kept thinking of it. And the next day, all of a sudden it just rose from the mist like Brigadoon, where it's like, oh, of course. And then I remembered the little green light that you have to wait for in order to gain access, and you have to knock at the little door, and then it's this huge door, and the vintage furniture and the artisan cocktails, and so my husband Rodney says that it's just that my bridges are out in my brain, and so I'm in the process of building bridges to find my way back to the memories. But it also made me think about like how fascinating the brain is, and how there must be so much, like the capabilities of the brain that we just haven't tapped into at all. And the idea that the concept that perhaps all those memories, everything from our lives, aren't actually forgotten, but are just in there someplace, and we just don't have the bridges.
Right. I love that. That's amazing. Yeah. When you referenced Chanel in the chapter you read, did you find anything else interesting about her or her perfumes? And that's from Evelyn.
Chanel, yeah, Chanel is fascinating, and of course, when you're going to explore World War II Chanel, you're going to get into her love affair with the Nazi and her. I mean, she just barely escaped the guillotine, I think, in the end because of her collaboration. But Rhonda Gerlich, my friend Rhonda Gerlich, who worked at UNL for a time, and now she's a dean at Parsons New School of Design and Fashion, and is this amazing fashion writer, and just has this wealth of fashion and style knowledge. She wrote a book called Mademoiselle, which is all about Chanel, which I highly recommend. It's a great read. And I think there's a new book about Chanel No. 5, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but it compares the marketing of Chanel No. 5 with a Soviet perfume as well. And so, yeah, I mean, Chanel and the history of the perfume is fascinating. It's fascinating also that actually the perfume was manufactured by these Jewish brothers who predicted what was going to happen in Paris and feared of the Aryanization of businesses that would occur. And so they very smartly got out of town, came to America, sold their business in a sense, and ultimately Coco Chanel, she kind of got she was quite furious because it impaired her royalties and such. So, but yeah, I could talk for days about Chanel.
That's awesome. What is the novel that you put down for a while and came back to, and what can we expect from you next?
I spend most of my time putting books down and going to another one. And because one of the things I found out in my brain investigations, because I saw neurologists and neuropsychologists, is that I have a clinically low attention. And so I failed all the attention tests, which I thought I was exceeding at. Like, I mean, the tests that they were doing, like, I was absolutely certain. I'm like, oh, I'm killing it. This is my rapt attention. And so I didn't even believe him when he said, like, I mean, it's like a clinically bad attention. And I'm like, no, that can't possibly be right. But I think that explains why I'm walking away from my desk all the time when I'm writing, because I'm getting lost in my imagination. And so I have so many books that I start because I'm anxious to start them, but then I have this other book that I have to read. So it's hard to pin down exactly which book I put down and picked up later, because that's the way I read all of them. So, but I am reading the Paris Hours by Alex George, which is really wonderful. I avoided reading any novels about Paris when I was writing my own novel about Paris. I was reading only nonfiction and Paris guidebooks from the 30s and 20s and about the history of war and all of that. But so now I'm feeling like I want to read only novels about Paris. So what I'm working on now, I've been describing it as a combination between The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which is a brand new book out that's everyone's excited about, plus Titanic, the movie, plus Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, plus maybe The Great Gatsby. So it's
I love it.
So it's yeah. So there's candy, there's cocktails, there's the Roaring Twenties, there's underground gay Los Angeles.
That's going to be amazing. All right, we have one more question, and this is from the chat. Do you ever get totally exhausted from revising? The small amount of writing I can do be exhausting. And so this is, so do you?
Let me see.
Yeah.
Do you ever get totally exhausted from writing I can do? Oh, it can be exhausting. It can be taxing, because it can take a lot of brain power, right? I mean, because sometimes like if you could just write a book without having to worry about telling a story, like without having to worry about making sense or worry about the reader at all, or plot or moving things forward, it would be a lot easier. Then you could just write whatever you want. I could just describe vivid scenes. I was accused of in my graduate school training by some of my teachers that I just cared about the vivid imagery and the quirky characters and not enough about the quote unquote the story. And I think, and I still get accused of that all these years later by reviewers. But and there might be some truth to that. But yeah, I think I love, like I was saying, the musicality. I love finding words. I love language. I love playing with language. I love playing with imagery. Virginia Woolf is one of my favorite writers. William Faulkner, Toni Morrison, all of these writers just engaged language with such virtuosity and engaged the imagination and created such vivid imagery and blended all of that in so provocatively and so fascinatingly that I never cared about the story that they were telling. Like, I didn't need a thread. I just wanted more and more and more of their words. And
I love that. It's amazing. So, Timothy, where can people find you? And I know behind you, you have one of your amazing candy wrapper girls, or some boys too. Yes, I didn't know if you could show that yet. I don't know if you've actually posted that.
It's a sneak peek. I was asked by bookshop.org to do some candy wrapper interpretations of my characters. And so this is Clementine in a suit by Clove Gum. So I got into the habit of making little paper dolls with candy wrappers and dressing them in little candy wrapper gowns. And so you can see them at timothy.schaffert on Instagram. I post them on Twitter and on Facebook. And so just look for me or go to timothyschaffert.com, and then all the links are there. And I right now I'm doing a series of perfume in the movies. And so there's this great site, it's borntobeunicorn.com, where she has just obsessively cataloged any reference to perfume in the movies, even if there's a scene where an actress is at a vanity or a sink, and if there's a bottle sitting there, she homes in on that and defines what the bottle, tells us what the bottle is. And so it's I've been exploring that area a little bit with my illustrations.
That's amazing. Do you think with your illustrations it'll ever be a book, an art book?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in conversations about that, and so I'm hoping. There's one particular editor who's been very nice and very supportive and very interested, and so I think something will happen along those lines.
Awesome. Well, this has been so fun. Thank you all for joining. I will try to find that. It's Born to Be a Unicorn. I think I posted the wrong link. So thank you, Aaron.
No. I think it's Born to Be Unicorn without an A. So
okay, thank you. Thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation, and I love seeing everybody in the chat, and it was really great. And I can't wait for everybody to read your book. And don't forget to fill out that survey, because we can't wait to award 5 people, 5 prize of the book right behind me. So very exciting. Timothy,
thank you. I love you. I love all of you. So many wonderful names. I saw that friends shown up on attendees, and so this has been great fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And everybody, this event is recorded, so you can always go back. And everybody have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.